their places. And I call the honourable member for McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, in recent days, the parliament and the people have been exposed to the spectacle, the undignified spectacle of the Prime Minister ducking and weaving, denying promises that he made on camera, denying the implications of what he said, denying that he said to the Australian people and made firm commitments to the Australian people before the election. Undignified spectacle from the Prime Minister of Australia. And he's had one defence against all. He says, yes, but I'm fixing the budget, he says. I'm doing all this to fix the budget. I know I said I wouldn't use the budget as an excuse before the election to breach my promises, but I'm fixing the budget. That's his alibi for the Australian people. That's his alibi for the broken promises. That's his excuse for his breaches of commitment to the Australian people right across the board, Australia's pensioners, Australia's families and Australia's friends of the ABC and SBS. That's his alibi and excuse, Madam Speaker. But his alibi is a false one. His excuse is a feeble one, because even with that excuse, he's not fixing the budget. Even under his own tests, Madam Speaker, the budget is getting worse on his watch and on his Treasurer's watch. It takes a special kind of talent to bring down a budget so unfair, so regressive, so rejected by the Australian people and by the parliament. A budget which rips at our social fabric and yet makes our economy and our budget worse. It takes a special kind of talent from a very ordinary Treasurer. We have a Treasurer so driven by prejudice that he's prepared to bring in cuts which not only damage Australian families but which damage confidence in the Australian economy, which damage the very budget itself and which damage business conditions right across the country. A Treasurer who's so determined to make political points, to talk our economy down, to use irresponsible language. The Treasurer of Australia so determined to play politics that his words and his deeds are a wrecking ball for confidence. We have an unusual situation in Australia, Madam Speaker. Normally, it's the government talking the budget up and the government talking the economy up. That's the normal situation. In Australia, you have a Treasurer determined to talk the economy and the budget down, and an opposition responsibly pointing out the economic fundamentals and the fundamentals of our budget. That's how extreme and desperate this Treasurer is. But the Treasurer talks the budget down in the lead-up to the budget, and we see the impact immediately. When the Australian people actually saw the budget and saw the cuts their Treasurer had in mind, you saw the impact even more starkly on our economy. We had the Treasurer and the Prime Minister say there'd be an adrenaline rush to the economy and confidence just by their very election.
That's right.
Well, some adrenaline and some rush. We've seen consumer confidence fall 13% since the election. And, Madam Speaker, the now Treasurer, the former Shadow Treasurer, has had plenty to say about confidence over the years. He said on the 14th of December 2011, in relation to a decline in consumer confidence, consumers lose confidence in the government, he said, linking consumer confidence directly to government decisions, linking it directly to the government of the day. He put out a press release and he tweeted. He does like Twitter, our Treasurer, or he used to like it a little more. He used to consult with it about public policy on matters, little matters like climate change. And he issued a cracker of a tweet on the 14th of May 2013. He said, "This budget delivers even more debt, deficits and taxes and broken promises from a government that can't be trusted." He's a clairvoyant, Madam Speaker. He saw his own budget coming 12 months early, Madam Speaker. Our Treasurer, I'm often critical of him, but he could see into the future on that particular occasion. But make no mistake, Madam Speaker, the impact on the Australian economy on confidence is a direct result of his words and his deeds. And there are plenty of people who have made this point. Westpac's chief economist, Bill Evans, commented that the sharp fall in the index in relation to consumer confidence is clearly indicating an unfavourable response to the recent federal budget. That was one of the sharp declines in consumer confidence. And then in May, when asked what impact do consumers expect from the budget to have on their family finances over the next 12 months, 59.2% considered that they would worsen. And they're right. They're right, Madam Speaker. And what an impact that had on consumer confidence right across the country. And in September, the budget still loomed large. It was delivered in May. In September, it was still looming large in relation to consumer confidence, with the proportion of respondents recalling budget and taxation issues the second highest since the survey was introduced in the mid-1970s. And you know what the highest was, Madam Speaker? One just before, under this Treasurer as well. He's got the highest and the second highest on his watch. So this is a direct result of his words and his deeds. And we hear a lot from this Treasurer and this government about how they're business-friendly and they understand business, but their actions belie their words. And the Australian Institute of Company Directors have called them out for what they are. They did a survey of directors across the country. Almost half directors claiming the government's performance is impacting on their business decisions negatively. A majority of directors believe the federal government's performance is negatively affecting consumer confidence. Well, there's plenty of evidence to that. And around half of the directors would rate the government's first year in office as poor or very poor. And, Madam Speaker, it gets worse. Directors have become more pessimistic about the future, and an increase in directors have said the federal government doesn't understand business and doesn't understand their concerns. So this is the impact of this so-called pro-business government and this pro-business Treasurer. And this has a direct impact on the budget bottom line. We're going to see a budget update in a couple of weeks. So remember when the previous government had to write down revenue, the Treasurer would get into full huff and puff mode. He'd beat his chest like only he can. He'd allege a scandal. He'd allege incompetence. He'd say there's no revenue problem. He'd say it'd all be different under his watch. And what do we get today when asked? What will you do? Will you blame revenue or blame Labor? Not a man for half measures, now Treasurer, Madam Speaker, not a man for half measures. He proudly proclaims both. He's going to blame both. What a diminished figure this Treasurer is. What a diminished figure this Treasurer is. Now, we will see the impact of his own actions and words in a couple of weeks in the budget update. We've already seen it in the figures. We've seen it in consumer confidence. We've seen it in the National Performance of Services survey. 70% of our economy is services. We've seen it contract for 8 consecutive months. And we saw in September the link made directly by that survey to the budget, saying that the survey raised concerns about the weak state of the local economy and the effect of federal budget uncertainties. A direct result of this Treasurer's incompetence, his lack of an economic strategy, his lack of an ability to convince the parliament or the people that his policies are fair, because they are not. Because they are not. His budget is fundamentally unfair, and it's also wrong for the Australian economy. We have a Treasurer who fundamentally misjudged the state of the economy in May, who thought that the economy could do with a dose of him talking it down, who thought that the economy could do with a dose of his harsh cuts, who thought that the economy could do with a dose of his rhetoric and his actions, and the economy is paying a price. Every Australian worker is paying a price. Australia's young people are paying a price, with youth unemployment the highest it's been since the now Prime Minister was Minister for Employment, with youth under-utilisation at a record high in the labour market, with a youth unemployment crisis. And what's this government's response? To deliberately create an underclass by throwing people under 30 off the New Start allowance. Well, that's a shame when it comes to fairness, and it's a shame when it comes to economic policy. Is it any wonder, Madam Speaker, that we see senior Liberals privately speculating in quite an extraordinary development, and perhaps senior Nationals as well, that the Treasurer might not make it to the next election? Might not make it to the next election. He might join that small and exclusive group of Treasurers who are so incompetent that they can't make a term, Madam Speaker. That this Treasurer might be sacked by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Communications put in his place, Madam Speaker. The fact that this Treasurer is so incompetent that senior Liberals speculate that he won't make it because he's incompetent, because he misunderstands the economy, because his unfair policies are bad for Australian families, because he has created budget emergencies right across the country, because he's created budget emergencies for Australia's states, because he's created a national budget emergency, because he is incompetent, because he is not up to the job, because he is a bad Treasurer, because he does not understand the Australian economy. He does not understand the impact of his words and his actions. because his prejudice is so bad that he introduces unfair policies which not only are unfair but are bad and damaging the economy, which is in his